Thank you, Lance. And you did say my name right. A couple of years ago, I was a new legislator, and it was in the interim. That's the time between the sessions. We study a lot of issues, and a representative from Bountiful, I was a senator from Sandy. We were on a committee, and his name was Paul Neuenschwaner. And so it was Wayne Niederhauser and Paul Neuenschwaner on this committee, and the committee chair could never get us right. It was Neuenhauser or Niederschwaner or something like that. So thank you, Lance. Very good. It's exciting for me to moderate this panel today. It's an astute panel of, I wouldn't call them emerging leaders. They are leaders in this area of affordable housing. We were supposed to talk about housing and workplace environments, but this looks more like an affordable housing group here, which is one of the major issues that we deal with here in this state. I served, if you don't know, for 12 and a half years in the legislature, and 6 of those as the Senate president. Was right in the middle of policy making for the state. And it was an amazing experience. I'll cherish it for the rest of my life, what remains of that life, and hopefully it's a long life. But it was an amazing experience, and during that experience, I had the opportunity to be on the Social Service Appropriation Committee and became acquainted with the Columbus Center. I know there's been a lot of shout-outs for the Columbus Center today, but I'm going to give one. Of all the organizations that came before that committee, they are one of the most amazing organizations that we deal with as a state. And so thank you, Columbus Center, for what you do for people with not disabilities, with abilities, but they're distinct abilities, and so they're D-abilities, right? And we just need to focus on what those abilities are. And so it's amazing, and thanks to Stephanie and Christy for setting this up, because this is an important issue that's facing our state. In real estate, and Taylor will relate to this, the 3 biggest issues with that we deal with in real estate is location, location, and location. That makes all the difference, and the Woodbury Corporation has been very successful with that. Congratulations. But there's the 3 biggest issues that the state deals with right now is infrastructure, infrastructure, and infrastructure. Growth is our major issue. It's driving the cost of housing up and kind of in a skyrocketing way, and making that unaffordable for a lot of people for various reasons, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, and we'll hear from our panelists. And first, we are going to hear from Cameron Gunter, and the bios are right there in your brochure, so refer to those, but he's the president of PEG Development. Thank you for being here, Cameron. And then we have Taylor Woodbury, COO of Woodbury Corporation, and Abby Ivory. She is the manager, impact investing at the Sorenson Impact Center. So we look forward to hearing their presentations regarding this important issue that is facing our state, one of the biggest issues. And the other, and if we don't get too much into the workforce or workplace issue, I think at the top of those infrastructure policy issues that we deal with is workforce first. As president, I got to meet with a lot of company owners, CEOs. Their number one issue was talent and talent pipeline. Number one issue for them. And if we can address that here in the state of Utah, we won't need any economic development. People will flock here because we have the talent and the talent pipeline for the future. And so if we can focus on that and make some inroads and some advances with workforce, it'll be tremendous. All right, so, but first I'm just gonna go do a little bit of a teaser. We have the Columbus Community Center has taken on a project wasn't an easy project, the hub. And we have a 3-minute video to start this session off on the hub, an affordable housing project that will be part of their program with people that have distinct abilities. So we'll now have our presentations. We'll start with Cameron and then Taylor, and then Abby, you'll get the last word. Jay Francis is not here, but take about 10 minutes each, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Well, thank you, Wayne. First of all, I want to appreciate Jay and Eric Olofsson for introducing me to Stephanie and Columbus and the cool things that you're doing. It's impressive, and I had the ability, the opportunity to tour the facility, and a great facility. Something a developer always likes to go through. They like to walk through the sticks and the bricks and see the things that other people are doing. And Stephanie, I'm sure, got the experience to see the tough things that us as developers get to do. So it's not easy. I heard Jamie say she figures things out. Our motto at PEG is we get shit done. So our team wants me to change that, but I'm
especially with these pictures.
Where I grew up in Idaho, that those aren't swear words; they're just words you use to describe something. So, but first, I'm the CEO of PEG Development, and it's a pleasure to be here with two distinguished families and more the up and coming of those families. You'll see that I don't belong. Gunter is not a name in this area or anywhere. I'd say in the Intermountain West, it's a very familiar name, but we're excited to be amongst this group of families and be able to work with the Woodburys on a lot of projects that we currently work with. I want to first start out with, you've seen, most of you, I don't know if you watch the news, but PEG has been on the news on about every channel this week with a project here in downtown Salt Lake, which is a really cool project for us. It has a lot of firsts, and it's been a challenge to get it done, but we have a group of people behind us within the company that really spent the time to make this work. And if somebody has the slides, if we go to that first slide. If everybody's familiar with the old paper box building that was, I think that building's been there for over 50 years. We were fortunate to have one of the sons, the dad, I guess he's still third generation, but he's probably in his early 80s. He was able to speak at our groundbreaking with Mayor Biskupski and give a little history on that project, which was really neat if anybody watched the news. But what this project does, I think, as you mentioned earlier, is it creates an opportunity for several things. One, the ability to have housing and the walkability and everything in the downtown, and also include affordability. We were able to win an RFP with the city on this property because it was owned by the RDA. One of the things that we did is we went to the RDA and said, look, you have really pushed this affordable housing requirement and really want affordable housing. And because my background was a city manager. I spent 8 years in the city management, so I understand some of the needs of affordable housing and some of the requirements that cities take upon themselves to try to provide that for their community. And so I said, look, if you guys have an opportunity now, without going through bonds and without doing anything else, to control what happens on this site. And so we came up with a program with them and just said, look, we'll pay you X number of dollars for this site if we can make it, and this just will have to be market rate. But we created a matrix for the RDA and said, look, if you're willing to reduce the price by X number of dollars, we'll provide so many affordable housing units. It got all the way down to 0, right? So we were able, and up to 20% affordable at 60% AMI. we were able to work with the RDA. I mean, this has taken us a year and a half or so to get this stuff done, on top of having to figure out how to build a mechanical parking structure in the state of Utah and have the fire department figure that out. But we were able to come up with this affordable housing component. And so if you'll see here, out of 195 units in this project, we'll also have some live-work units. We'll have 39 of them that will be affordable at that 60% of AMI, which is huge. And it's also huge for Columbus, for what their program is, because now it'll allow, on top of what you have, it's part of Columbus itself, but now if there are employees in the downtown market that, you know, that can't drive or don't have transportation now, and they aren't making that higher income, now there's a place for them to go, and it's walkable, and there's some community amenities. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll kind of go through the parking structure. So because downtown ground is so expensive and because it's so tight, we came up, and we're not the first to do this in the United States, we're the first to do it in Salt Lake City. And that's why it was so difficult. But this is what they call city lift. We call it the puzzle system. Somebody drives in, they pull their car into their parking spot, they push a button, and it puts it somewhere. And when they want it, it honestly takes about 1 minute for your car to arrive back to where you pulled it in the first place or wherever you tell it to on your app. So a very unique system, and this system on this project, because the only place for us to go is to underground, we're able to build this more affordable than trying to build a full underground parking structure. So as you see, that's a first. You see kind of the center courtyard area where it has a walkable community that ties into the gateway, which is very, very important for us to tie the gateway into the rest of downtown through mid-block. So that has 126 car lift, and then there's another so many to come up to 162. Those are surface parkings at the ground level. If you go to the next slide, we can show the amenities. So we have, in the center of this thing, we had to create some outdoor amenities, which is important for us in a downtown market, which is hard to do. In a project we just did on 2nd South, 2nd West, our amenities got put on the top of the parking structure, which was nice, has fake grass. But this one will be at grade where it's mid-block, so it's super enticing for the people that live there. And so having the mix of affordable and market rate and having these amenities, we think is a great mix of tenants for all kinds to help accomplish this affordable housing in the downtown market. So we're doing some similar stuffs in other states, including Ketchum, Idaho, of all places, to try to create affordability there, and down in Scottsdale, Arizona. But this is, the first of what we're doing here, and hopefully more properties like this that we see here in the state as well. So one of the things that's causing us, if you go to the next slide, this is a slide that we kind of track a little bit at our company. This is comparing construction costs to lease rates. So if you look at our revenue for apartments, now what I've done, there's a lot of different types of apartment projects that are built out there. What I did is I took our urban development projects that includes a parking structure, a wrap, or something that's built urban that has interior hallways, or that has some kind of a parking structure component. Our company's been around since 2003, and so I've been able to take some data from our company to really do this. So you look at the construction prices and the increase in construction prices, that's what's driving rents up. Now, rents cannot continue to increase with salaries not increasing at the same rate, but you see how these things work for developers. This is a good picture that is the reason that we have to figure out different methods to make housing more affordable, and getting the public entities involved to help do that. And whether it be through tax incentive, whether it be through bonds, whether it be through something the city's already owned, this is something we're looking at and making it a priority for us as a company to make this work in these urban markets. So that's my presentation. I'll turn that over to you. It's probably more than 10
Thank you,
minutes.
Cameron. No, you're right. You had 39 seconds
Okay.
left. So, Taylor.
I really am grateful to be here today, and excited to be sitting next to Cam. Cam and I have been through the ringer here together the last year, trying to get a different type of affordable housing project, a student housing project, approved and through the city process in Orem. Some of you may be familiar with that or heard about the Palos Verdes project. We've wisely changed the name at this point, so we don't have to have everybody hear Palos Verdes. But when you look at student housing, most students don't have a credit history. They don't have the ability to put down security deposits. They don't have the ability to rent more than a bed. And so you look at a market like Utah Valley University, where there's there's not enough student housing beds to even get 12% of the student population at Utah Valley University into a student housing bed currently. And so you think about student housing as a type of affordable housing. It's not your typical thing you think about, but in reality, for those students, it's a very situational type of housing that they need, and it fills a market for them. And I think that in so many cases, when we think about affordable housing, the first point I'd like to make is it's so important to think about what market you're trying to fill and what niche you're trying to fill. The Columbus project is a great example of that. I mean, it's a very niche, affordable housing project that isn't, necessarily, solving the overall housing crisis. But if you think about affordable housing as just one thing, that it has to be a particular type of unit or a particular type of project, I think you're really short-sighted. I've been fascinated to see some of the innovations in affordable housing. You've seen these situations where you have, it's almost like a dorm. Everybody has their own bedroom with a large closet and a large bathroom, and then you share with complete strangers, 4 or 5 other complete strangers, a common area space that has a kitchen in it and a large family room and a gathering space in the middle, and that's one unit. And all you're renting is your bed and your right to use the common area under certain constraints. You have smaller units that people are looking at. You have stacked units. It's just so fascinating to see the different products that people come up with and the creativity people are using to try to address this affordable housing. But it foundationally, and to touch on what Senator Niederhauser said and also what Cam said, foundationally, the thing I love about real estate and real estate development is it is really just a math game. And there are so many mathematical constraints that we deal with when we develop real estate. And, it's fascinating to me. There was a study that came out, a paper published by UCLA last year, where somebody was studying to try to understand why people, and I forget what city they were studying in, why they're against upzoning. And so upzoning is when you're increasing the density on a particular piece of property. And they assumed that the homeowners would be against the upzoning, but they were shocked to find that not only the homeowners were against the upzoning, but all of the apartment dwellers were also against the upzoning. And so they're like, why is that? You would think that apartment dwellers would be excited for upzoning, and they studied it, and what they found was the common thread that everybody was against was the greedy developers who are making a profit on the housing to start with. And so their conclusion was, we think people might actually be against the developers more than they're actually against the housing project to start with, which was a little disconcerting for me. And I unfortunately had like 4 friends send me the article in like a half-an-hour period with smiley emoticons and stuff following it, going, ha ha, look at everybody hates you, And the funny thing to me is, like, if you look at the rhetoric surrounding high density housing and the growth and densification of neighborhoods, and you find a common thread that people come back to this idea that, hey, developers are greedy. And that's the problem we have here, is who's benefiting from creating hardship in our communities and our towns. And what's interesting to me is I don't think a lot of people have perspective. And my second point I'd like to make today is this idea that what we do is heavily mathematically constrained. And what I mean by that is construction costs go up, okay? We look at the market, and we are constantly trying to determine what we could get in terms of rent in a given market, and if that makes sense with construction costs. And I will tell you that more often than not, we are turning down projects because we simply can't make them work from a cost standpoint, and we can't get enough rent. And not only that, even if we wanted to move forward with the project, as real estate developers, we are heavily dependent on financing and getting loans. And at the end of the day, anytime we go in for a loan, we have to prove to the bank, and we have to satisfy the bank this idea that we're going to make a high enough return to not only cover what the payments have to be on the loan that we want from the bank, but also and some excess, okay? And all of these things are based on the bank's assessment of the risk and historical, trends in housing. And the bank says, look, you have to get to 109% or 110% of our debt service payment for us to even give you this loan. And so when we come before a city council and we come before a city and say, hey, this is what we can build, this is what we can do to make this project move forward so we can finance it, I will tell you that I have never been in a situation sitting before a city where I know in the back of my mind that I'm just going to be Scrooge McDuck swimming through gold coins at the end of the day because of a project I'm building. Legitimately, I have got to the point where I can walk away at this point. I have nothing else I can do. And all of that is just based pure and simple on the economics and the math. And we do huge amounts of underwriting and mathematical modeling to try to prove out every one of these scenarios to try to see how much we can give. And so as that relates to the affordable housing discussion, if it's true, and if you take as a given that the developers really are constrained with what we can do with our resources, the only way for us to create affordable housing is to somehow bridge the gap, okay? We can't take less than a certain amount of money, because we can't get a loan if we can't get that. We can't get investor capital if we can't get that. So how do we bridge that gap? And PEG is one of the best in the market at this. They come up with such creative strategies for figuring out ways to bridge that gap. Sometimes it's just getting a few extra units. If we can get a little bit more density on a property, that allows us to get a little bit of extra income and pass that savings on to affordable units. Sometimes it's tax credits or other government programs. But in every situation, there's no way for me as a developer just to create affordable housing unless I have something that's going to differentiate my project from other projects. And so much of that, to my third point, is a function of construction costs. If we go into, I'm not going to say it, if we have some problems economically going forward, I'm going to tell you that it's going to be a function of construction costs. Right now, we are at an absolutely critical point in the state of Utah with regard to construction pricing. And it's a function of a lot of things. In some respects, we've never recovered from the recession in that industry. People who were in the construction industry never came back after the recession. A lot of them moved on to other jobs. Just the other day, I met a guy who was creating a sports drink, and he used to be a contractor. And I said, would you go back to being a contractor? He's like, never again. He goes, I got burned so badly in 2008, I can't go back to that ever again. And we have to figure out a way as a state to buoy up our construction industry, because it's only going to exacerbate the problem we have with affordability in housing and affordability in office and affordability in everything we build, infrastructure, if we can't figure out a way as a state to have a really strong and dynamic construction industry. And, we are turning away more projects than we have for the last 10 years, just in the last 18 months, because we go out and we get bids, and the bids are coming in 10 or 20% higher than we projected. And our projections were based on a project that we'd just done, a few months prior. And I know Columbus ran into this when they were trying to bid up their project, and what you go through is the same thing we're going through every time. So when we talk about these mathematical constraints, construction costs are just an absolute disaster for the real estate industry right now. But that is going to affect every one of us as we get into new retail projects, new office, and affordable housing. Next point I'd like to make, with regard to infrastructure. I was so glad that we led off talking about infrastructure. If you picture a circle and you picture the area inside that circle, I tried to look through one of my kids' math books this morning because I know there's some ratio that I could have quoted if I'd had enough time, but I could not find it. So maybe there's not. But if you picture that circle growing, okay, the area, the diameter is going to grow at a slower rate than the area. The ratio is going to exponentially grow. Okay, I illustrate that because you look at this valley and this circle that we live in. The further out that we sprawl and the further out that we move from our core, the more and more area we have to fill with infrastructure and with schools and with hospitals and with roadways and utilities. And it gets to the point where you reach a breaking point. And it actually isn't a lot cheaper to live in Harriman than it is to live in Granger or in other areas, closer into town, because of all those costs associated with spreading out. And so, the last point I'd make is that we have to figure out a way to densify, what we have and continue to rebuild current infrastructure and improve infrastructure that we have currently, as opposed to thinking that sprawling out is the answer. And one thing I'll just throw out, I mean, I am totally fascinated with what they've done in Minneapolis in terms of eliminating the single-family home zoning requirement. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, zoning is holding us back when it comes to efficient land planning at this point. And we really need to look at a scenario where, as opposed to only looking at high density, only looking at sprawl, we're in a situation where we're taking traditional single-family neighborhoods and saying, okay, where there was one home, there now can be two, or there now can be three in Minneapolis' case. And that's really the only way we're going to efficiently use the infrastructure. And that's a tough decision because it affects a lot of people, but at the same time, I don't think there's any more responsible decision we could be taking than trying to figure out how to densify what we already have, as opposed to just trying to continue to sprawl.
Thank you, Taylor.
Hi, maybe I'll just
Abby.
Okay.
Sorry about
So no, you're totally great. I'll just give you a little bit of background on me. So I am mic closer. Okay, I got it. So my name's Abby Ivory, and I'm part of the Ivory family, as in Ivory Homes. So I've grown up around construction my whole life, but in terms of work, I work at the Sorenson Impact Center, and we kind of work on finding solutions to social problems. And so it was really fun recently, and this is why I think I'm on this panel, to work on a project with my family and with the Ivory Foundation, where we are finding solutions for housing affordability. And we've really gone through it and taken a look at kind of the more macro issues, and then kind of taken a look at potential solutions. And one of the ways that we've tried to do this is by using a prize mechanism, where we've been going out and seeking a lot of different companies or individuals who have been doing things that are really innovative in this field. And you guys have touched on it, and I think it's super interesting, all of the different super innovative things that need to happen to really help affect change in housing affordability. And so I kind of, in terms of what I wanted to talk about, was kind of more what's driving these issues. And since we have such a huge issue, especially here in Salt Lake City and in Utah, and I think that we kind of overlook that. We kind of think, Utah's kind of been really affordable for a long time, and we're coming to a time where we're not. And we've really had so much growth and in-migration that we just are not, housing prices are skyrocketing. And if you look at the data, we have so many households that are doubled up. We have, I think I was looking at the other day, there were 333,000 people that are doubled up, living with parents or living in a way that they could potentially go out and buy their own home or rent their own unit or do something else, but they've chosen not to. And a big issue with that is this housing affordability. And so I think, so when we look at this, one of the main reasons why we've had this problem is the rising home prices. And this is due to we talked about, the rising costs in labor, land, and then also any sort of regulatory issues. Sometimes the regulation and the hold up and the amount of time it takes to process some of these projects, that can actually be a huge cost in the end. And so there's also a huge gap right now in the number of households that are being created and the number of households that are being built. And so that's this is what has kind of driven this. And so we have this deficit. We have, a ton of demand and just not enough supply in the housing industry. And it's crazy. I was thinking about and looking at the renting side of it. We do need to build in density, but if you look at the renters and the costs of renting a home, 1 in every 5 renters are paying over 50% of their, income to their housing costs. And this is just such a huge factor. This drives into all these different things, with the community, and it really affects the way that they, are able to spend money in terms of, their children's education or food or transportation or different things that are really going to have long-term effect on potentially their children and other things. And so that actually those people are at the highest risk of homelessness, which is why this housing affordability issue is such a big deal, because when you get on the top layer of things, and people who are making enough money where they should be able to afford a home are being pushed down into some of these lower income units, it kind of just systematically pushes everyone down. So the people who, are at the highest risk are actually going to enter into this homeless population. And we've had, I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have seen in the state of Utah such a huge issue with homelessness. Most recently, I mean, it's been really magnified in that Rio Grande area, and with this spread of, you know, these homeless shelters across the city, actually. But it's really interesting, and so I think that's kind of why it's such a big issue. Because I always think, like, okay, why are we pushing things to become more affordable? Why would developers care? And because in the long run, it has these huge effects. And so I think that's really important to think through. And then we kind of, after having done this research, we looked at solutions for housing affordability in 3 different sectors. And one was financial innovation, and one was policy and regulatory reform, and then the other was construction and design. And there's so many different ways people are trying to solve this problem right now. And with construction and design, like, I love the idea of the car elevator, right? Because that's helping save space. But we've seen such a huge trend in modular housing, which is a little bit different. And it's not quite ready, I don't think, to kind of, you know, come out and, like, really produce these affordable units, but eventually it'll get there. And currently they're kind of, if they can be able to produce these units at a mass scale, like cranking out 1 to 2 units a day instead of, you know, 1 unit every 28 days, in kind of a more, you know, a factory setting, I think it could really affect housing affordability. And then I think when you look at the financial side of things, there is such potential for innovation, because the last innovation in, you know, housing, you know, in housing finance was really the 30-year mortgage. And that was, you know, how long ago? And so we really are ready for something to start changing in that. And we've seen a lot. I mean, you guys have done a lot there. The Columbus Community Center's done a lot of really innovative stuff with, you know, financing this new project. And you really had to learn how to layer all these different components to make something work. And I think that's fantastic, but there are also other solutions that are maybe easier. Yeah, right? Because it's so expensive, and it's difficult, and it's really hard to figure out. And so I think we've looked at people who are trying to, you know, help people get into homes more affordably, and that's kind of come on the, you know, some people are addressing teachers. There's a lot of this rent to own. There's a lot of, you know, shared mortgage, the potential with building an accessory dwelling unit or an ADU in your yard to double up on your density, but also at the same time kind of help with your cost, help lift the cost and with the financing there. So I think that there are a lot of different ways to kind of go about that. And then the policy and regulatory reform is obviously something that should be changed. I mean, like, this is something that we need, right? we need to help this housing affordability. We need density. We need, you know, a lot of these things to be changed to make it easier so that we can facilitate and push these projects through. And so I think there are really a lot of, you know, solutions that we should be looking at, that people should be coming up with. And I think we're just, right, I mean, we need it now, so we have to innovate. And so I think that's kind of where we are. And I think that's the Columbus Community Center project is such an important part of that innovation, where you guys are, like, really hitting a niche where you're helping these people that need it and providing that affordable housing, but also, you know, for these people that are maybe disabled, and providing, you know, that work where they can work or go to school in the same building. Like, different things like that can be super helpful when you're building the infrastructure around this. And so I just think, you know, as we look for solutions moving forward, I love what's being done in terms of becoming more innovative and, like, thinking through the populations that really need the help. And so I just think that it's going to happen, and it has to happen. And so that's kind of, you know, my thoughts on housing affordability and where we're going. And I hope it's going to be somewhere great.
So thank you very much, and we're going to now open it up for some discussion here, but I'm going to just highlight a couple things before we go into that discussion. ADUs were mentioned here. SB 34 was passed by the legislature this year. It addresses somewhat this accessory dwelling unit. At least it's on the radar screen, because you don't have to put in new sewer systems and roads and those types of things. It might be a tiny house in your backyard, but it's an accessory dwelling unit. That's some things we need to be thinking about. If you'll have that one slide come up, here's the other issue, and I think it was highlighted, but this is just part of the complication that Stephanie and Christy had to deal with in putting together this affordable housing, the hub, this building they're building right now. I'm looking at some notes that they sent me of there was 8 different entities they needed to work through. There was delays because of red tape. There was layers of different programs that they were able to put together, wraparounds and this and that. And it's the most complicated thing I've ever seen. And how you even got through that, I'm amazed. And I'm a real estate developer, and we're dealing with this all the time. But how you got through that, and I think between the entities that you dealt with, there was probably close to $1 million in attorney's fees just to figure it out. And how many more units could you build for $1 million? And so we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. We need affordable housing, but we're making it extremely difficult. Did you have a comment, Christy? Oh yeah, thank you, Troy. He got an education on this, and so, that's okay. Questions, comments? Yes.
I think there could be. Here's where we see the biggest challenge in cost of construction. And having people from the border come in doesn't affect it. It's your trades. So you think of people my age, when I graduated from high school, kids that I graduated from high school with were going to be electricians and plumbers. Today, the kids my age in their 50s are now senior in their positions. The guys that were trained them are retiring, but there's nobody behind coming into those trades. And that's where the challenge is. There's a little bit on just the labor force, but the biggest challenge we see in commercial construction, and I'm sure it's in housing too, it's your electrical, plumbing, HVAC subs. They just aren't there. So, and some of your high-end concrete people aren't there either. And so, yes, if there would be some kind of a training program to bring some of that labor over, that they have the skills to do it, then yes, I think that does make a change. But I think we have to figure out how to get more and more people, like we did when I was younger, into that field. And it's tough. It's tough because of technology, or we have to change to do things better through technology. So, I think there's a variety of different things that I've seen. I was just in Canada last week. They are having the same exact problem as we are having here. So we're building some stuff there, and it's the same thing. And
these are not just low-paying jobs. These are
good-paying jobs.
Really good-paying jobs, Abby.
And that's one thing we talk about. So Sorenson is based at the University of Utah, and one thing we actually talk about a lot is, is college or is going to the university the answer for everyone coming out of high school? And there's been a really big cultural shift, kind of like everyone goes to university, or everyone who can afford it, or anyone, kind of goes there. And one thing that we've talked about a lot is kind of highlighting, how important these trades are, how much money you can make in the trades, that like could actually be a lucrative, stable career for a lot of people, and kind of finding a way to kind of go into these high schools and really highlight that. Is one thing that we've been talking about in terms of a solution, because we really do just need to get a lot more people into the trades.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm just going to quickly say, though, more labor wouldn't hurt.
Yeah. This lady here.
Well, here's an example. You saw we had 39 units in the paper box. That represented about $3.5 million of capital I didn't have to spend. Okay, so that's your guide right there. So if these other organizations, which we'd be happy to talk to, we've talked to them in other markets, whether they have ground, whether they have grants, we have the Olin Walker housing monies out there. There's all kinds of other opportunities. There's tax incentive programs, which we've done in Ogden to create some affordable housing. So there's multiple ways to do that. And I think if these other not-for-profits have the ability to step into the capital stack with some restrictions, I think that's very helpful. And we would be interested too. I think Woodbury's would, because it all becomes how the capital stack, right? What it costs in this situation, $3.5 million if we don't have to pull out of our pocket, and it's providing something for the community. Their return is they need affordable housing, right? Their mandate is, look, we need to provide for our citizens. So their return is not dollars as much as it is providing some kind of service and some kind of a benefit to the community.
Other comments? I saw one over here, yes.
Yes, so this property is also opportunity zone. So when we talk about the firsts, there's a bunch of firsts that happen. PEG has an opportunity zone fund. This will be our second property that we've started construction on. We start construction on another project in Rochester, Minnesota next week, which is an opportunity zone. And it makes a difference. What we've ran our calculations on is there's about a 250 basis point spread in returns based on the tax savings, about 40 basis points a year, 40 to 50 basis points a year on what that savings in tax after the 10-year hold and the step up in basis. So look, the program will work. We're hoping the regulations will come out in the next couple of weeks on how businesses work, and we think that'll happen from some of the discussions we've had from our legal counsel. But I think that's another opportunity that helps where returns can, having that, the tax benefit and the tax structure reduce the overall cost of doing that project. So I think it's great. It's another opportunity to create that affordable housing if it's used right. And I think there's some challenges with when they pass the statute, because what's happening is people that had the ground are trying to raise their price on the ground, which just it counteracts what the law was. So
Yeah, and to echo that, in terms of opportunity zones, we've taken a lot, we've looked at a lot of different groups who are doing that and the regulations behind it, and I've talked to a lot of developers, and I think a lot of people are waiting for the regulations to kind of be a little bit more set before they make their decisions on what they're going to do. But I do know also one of the number one concerns around it is just gentrification instead of actually affecting change, and so how they're going to mitigate that where they go into these opportunity zones and develop them.
I will say, just to give a shout out to our state leadership. We've looked at some other states that, in my opinion, absolutely blew the opportunity of designating where their opportunity zones are located. The way the state of Utah did it, we had properties that were right on the border that didn't get included that we were frustrated about. I think everybody is kind of in that boat, but there's states that identified properties that made no sense to ever redevelop or ever do any development, and at least I can say the vast majority of the property that Utah designated is property that's ripe for redevelopment, ripe for taking advantage of this. And it comes back to the mathematical constraint that I talked about. All that did was it removed one of the mathematical constraints that we needed to be able to get a project to go forward. In a sense, it artificially removes it a little bit because right now we're at the sweet spot for doing things in opportunity zones. It tapers off from this point forward, and it's going to go back, but at the same time, I think it's a big opportunity.
And just before we get your comment, just let me just say that I saw this a lot in public policy and just the economics of it. Is you give an incentive, you get a subsidy, you give some kind of an opportunity, and the challenge is to try to capture the benefit of that for affordable housing and not necessarily for a landowner or someone else. That's the challenge, because that savings is there's a lot of people that want to take that savings now rather than create more affordability. So, yes, Bill.
So, settings rule. Housing for the disabled. You're violating the spirit. Guidance has been clear.
So the setting rule in particular, I can't speak to other examples of that, but I can tell you that that principle exists for affordable housing, regardless of what demographic or who you're trying to target. I mean, you look at places where I think affordable housing has been a disaster. I mean, they're referred to as the projects in some, communities now, right? I mean, when I lived in Washington, D.C., I mean, they had a systematic program of a certain number of units had to be affordable and had to stay that way for 30 years. But you had to randomly place them throughout the building and randomly place them, so that there was no, you couldn't say, oh, this is the unit we're going to give at the affordable prices because it's a crappy unit. We have to spread those out. And I think that, coming back to this idea of what Minneapolis is doing, where they just said blanket, hey, we want any place there's a single family home, we want to, allow up to 3 homes to be built on that same property. The nice thing about that is it just kind of, it's randomly casting out into all of the properties in a city, where all of a sudden these pockets of a threeplex is going to pop up where there was a single family home. It's not trying to concentrate it all in one area, because I think that's where you run into problems when you're really trying to concentrate it that way. Keeping it spread out, making sure that it makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, you want to be able to do it all under one roof and be able to provide a great program, but at the same time, there's a lot of benefits to having that spread out and benefits that I think transcend, just serving one demographic. I mean, it's everybody's responsibility to tackle the affordable housing crisis. It's not just North Salt Lake's responsibility or, the west side of Salt Lake City. Every neighborhood, regardless of where you live, needs to be, doing something to help us address affordability.
I can't tell you how many times I've been excited about a new policy, but then when it starts to get administered, it's too much red tape. It's too much. There's too much challenge in it. We just got to make it easier. Yes, Allison.
I know that more affordable housing. Anything the cities can do in the various areas.
Yeah, I think it really becomes, there's a couple of things. I think Taylor addressed it, is density. Can you get a few more units? That if you can get more density, or you can reduce parking by providing so many more affordable housing units. I did a project in 2005 in Ketchum, Idaho, where we built on every square inch of the property. And if anybody understands Ketchum, it's a high-end market. The city allowed me to increase my density and build on every square inch and do some things with parking, so long as I provided 5 affordable or deed-restricted units. It made sense for us to build those, and who we got in there. We got the firefighters, we got the school teachers, we got the people that worked for the city that had to live out in Cary, if anybody understands where Cary is. And they drive an hour to work because they can't afford it. So there's ways to do it. Impact fees, Ogden City, we did a project in Ogden down by the river where the city said, okay, if you provide so much affordable housing, and it wasn't affordable from the standpoint of what you'd get with a bond, but it was affordable for the people there and were full because of it. They provided impact fee reimbursements and some of those things where it just layered on costs. If those get reduced and there's a benefit that's tied to it, not just reduce it, but there's a benefit tied to it, I think that's how it happens.
You know, it's interesting. Are you are you guys seeing any softening in occupancy across the valley right now? Yeah. Do you know, I mean, from ICO's standpoint, are they? Yeah, I mean, I'm going to tell you, I mean, we have projects with both Ivory and with PEG. All of our projects are completely full. I mean, there's always some structural vacancy of people turning over, but you know, the kind of the prevailing idea that kind of these high density projects are built and they're not filling up is not true. I mean, there has been just almost limitless demand at times, it seemed, for these apartment units. And what's been fascinating to us is, like, at our project in University Place that we built with Ivory, we marketed those thinking we were going to be selling to millennials, and we've been shocked at how many empty nesters have moved into our project, because there's so many people that are trying to downsize from their single family homes and love the idea of apartment lifestyle. And so, well, and that's another and that's another regulatory issue. I mean, we have a hard time building condos because of the liability that's ongoing with it. So, I think that there are definitely things cities can do, and there's little tweaks they can make as these projects are going in. If they think about, we'd like to see some affordability here. What can we do to just, remove a little bit of a mathematical constraint for you to be able to add that component to it?
There are a couple of cities that have been doing some really cool stuff, and I was just down in Austin, and Austin just barely passed a proposition called Proposition A, and it's an affordable housing proposition, and they're putting a ton of money back into it. And so it's all, like, they've recognized this is a problem, and they are trying to actively do something to solve it. And then you have, I think, Bill Gates up in Seattle, right, who's committed a ton of money to this affordable housing issue as well. I mean, a lot of people have recognized it, but it's like kind of all about finding the solution or finding the way to get this into the regulatory to incentivize builders to build affordable units instead of market rate, because they can get market rate renters in there, so it's how do you kind of make that work? I think that's what we need to really work on. Yeah.
So here's an interesting thought. Affordability is a relative term, and no matter how affordable we make housing, there's still going to be a population that can't afford the affordable housing. And so they're going to try and figure out a way to have housing, and that is like in the Bay Area. I have a niece, and they pack a bunch of people in an apartment. Do you have restrictions on your apartments on how many people can live in there? Because that's how they're solving it. In the Bay Area, by the way.
Cities are pretty wise to that strategy. I mean, this last project.
Maybe they're doing it, without people knowing, but
It's hard to regulate, but we regulate it at our property level. We have an asset or a manager on property that regulates that, because it's bad for us to have that many people in a place too. It's not good for the.
it's hard on the asset.
There are a lot of co-living models, like there's a group called Star City. There are a couple of groups, and they kind of go in and they actually enforce this. So they'll put in a lot of roommates, and they found a way to do this within regulations where they can have 4 people who are unrelated, or 5 people living in the same unit, but they all have their own room, but like was said, shared their own the bathroom, living spaces, whatever. But they found a way to do that within regulations, just as a company renting out individual rooms. And it's done really well in, the San Franciscos, but in Salt Lake, there's a law that you can't have, I think it's more than 3 or 4 people who are not related living in the same home. And I don't know, it's been interesting to watch how people are solving it. And even in Boston, there's a new company that's starting to move people who are students in with the elderly population, because there's been, they don't have enough money to pay for housing, but the elderly population really needs, someone to help take out the garbage or do something like that. And so for a decrease in their rent, they'll go do that. It's really interesting to watch how this is being solved.
How much time do we have left? All right, we'll take one more question. This gentleman in the back.
another mathematical constraint. I mean, living in an earthquake zone, living, with within the restraints of how, how high we can build, how big fire trucks are in the municipality where we're building. I mean, like how high they can get a ladder truck up. I mean, there's all sorts of constraints that constrain that. But, I think in general, figuring out ways. I'm just going to come back to, because I'm so fascinated by this Minneapolis experiment. I mean, figuring out ways to densify what we have currently, and even if that just means building a duplex on a property that used to just have a single family home, that creates the opportunities for the empty nesters to live. That creates opportunities for first time, new homeowners. We need to get more creative, but we need to do it frankly on a statewide, or at least on a Wasatch Front level. One city deciding they're going to do this is going to be a disaster. It needs to be a problem that everybody in the Wasatch Front agrees that we need to face and we all need to tackle together.
Yeah, it was my job. He says it's my job. It was my job. and I think that land use is at the root. It's at the foundation of this problem. It boils all down to land use. And 2 years ago, there were 3 mayors that were unseated in the south end of this valley on a platform by their opponent that we don't want any more affordable, we don't want any more density in our city. And so I think politics are probably the biggest challenge we have, and it's not earthquake zones or we'll figure that part out. It's the politics that is at the root of that. We have to accept as a people that we're going to have more density and not out, with pitchforks and lanterns trying to stop it. Facebook. That's the new pitchfork and lantern. So thanks to all these panelists, and appreciate their time today.